Hello. In this section I want to give a little bit of information about how to work with multiple objects inside of ZBrush. So you can see here I've got a fairly complex model, has multiple parts, has a cape, has pedestal, has boots, has a hammer, helmet, all of these different parts to it. And the entire model is composed of 12 million polygons. You can see right there. But I'm working with this model in roughly 2 million polygon chunks. And that, in a lot of ways, just makes certain things easier. Now, I'm working with a 64-bit operating system and 4 gigs of RAM, so I could work with 12 million polygons without too many problems. But that's not going to be possible in a 32-bit operating system. So we have to look at other ways to manage this. So there are two options for when working with multiple objects. There's subtools, and there are polygroups, which you can see when you press frame. Now, polygroups means that the object is all one subtool. So it's all one object. You can sculpt across the seams of these polygroups. You can affect them individually by just isolating, say, one part. Control-Shift and clicking on it. And so now I've got just this one arm that I can be affecting. Control-Shift click outside to look at the entire mesh. But notice how whenever I do an action here, it does not end up affecting these other things like the cape, or the hair, or the helmet, or the boots. And that's because those are actually completely separate objects, and they're subtools. So now if I go in and just turn the eye icon off for all of them by just clicking the eye icon of the active subtool, I'll see just the body. This is all one part. Let's turn on a different material there, make it easier to see. I can, again, sculpt across the seams. But if we say activate the hair, and we try to sculpt across the seam there, you can see it's not getting quite the same effect. That's the primary difference between subtools and polygroups, is that if it is a subtool, you cannot affect the other inactive subtools. If it's a polygroup, then you have to actually hide it to isolate it. And the reason why this was done was to allow you to increase your polygon count. So if it's a poly group, if everything is grouped under one, then you can only have as many polygons in this one model as your system can handle. And so for 32-bit operating systems, that's sometimes between 3 and 4 million polygons. But as you can note here, I've got 12 million, and I need to be working with, at least that much. So the only way I'm going to be able to do that on a 32-bit operating system is with subtools, because I want the body itself to be 2 million polygons. See how we've got active points of 2 million. Now if I go in and I select the hair only has 100,000. It's a very small part. But if I go in and I select the cape, let's say, the cape is very detailed and contains almost 1 million polygons. And that's because it has thickness. It has a front, a back, and just has a lot of detail going into it. Now the hammer is 2 million polygons. And the reason why the hammer is 2 million polygons is because I've gone in and put some detail in it, such as up here at the top, make it look like wood, or the hammer getting kind of beat up a little bit and textured. Also, the handle here having this fabric wrapping these straps, and this little cap down here at the bottom. If I turn polyframe on and I go to the lowest subdivision level, you can see that it's very, very basic. Most of that detail, all of that detail, is in the sculpt at the higher subdivision levels. So it really needs 2 million polygons in and of itself. And in that case, it needs to be a separate subtool. So again, I want to reiterate that when you are working with multiple objects inside of ZBrush, or when you are trying to get as many polygons into an object as possible, you have to think about a couple of things. One, do you want to sculpt across the seams? If you want to sculpt across the seams and you want to sculpt both objects, then you really need to keep it as one continuous surface, and you need to use polygroups. If for some reason you need as many polygons as possible, the one piece of advice I can give you is you go to Tool, Texture, and you make sure that you click Disable UV. That will allow you usually to subdivide one more time. It's not going to let a 32-bit operating system work with 8 million polygons, but it will let you go from 1 million to 4 million. But then if you have something that does not need to be sculpted, the parts don't need to mesh like that. For example, the helmet here, or the wings that attach to that helmet. Those don't need to be connected in the same way, so they can be separated out. And now, when working with subtools, there are a couple of things that we need to be mindful of. First, let's see how we get subtools into our computer and work from there. So first, go into the tool palette. I'm going to select the poly mesh, and I'm going to choose import. Okay, so let's bring in our parts. First thing I'm going to do is select the largest part, and that in this case is going to be the body. So you can see here, here's one of our low-res parts. Now, if I go in and I press import and start to import in, say, the boots, it's just going to swap that out. Not what I really want to do. So let's undo that. What I've got to do is select the poly mesh in between, bring the boots in, select the poly mesh star again, import, bring the cape in. This is an older cape. And then we can go back to Thor. Let's go back into our body here. Let's turn perspective on. And we are going to simply go in, press append, and say append the boots. Looks like the body was arranged separately. Let's see what happens with the cape as well. Cape is off as well. And so this is a really good thing for us to be able to see, because it's going to help us understand, how the subtools are working. So let's take a look at these inside of Maya. Okay, so here we are inside of Maya. Let's bring in the body. So it looks like the body's been placed right there on top of the grid. Okay, we're going to go import, and let's just import the boots to see where they are. And so here we see that the body and the boots are not lined up. And so when we append them, that's exactly what we're going to get here. So I'm just going to go into this body, back into Maya, sorry, select the body, and then I'm just going to lower this down and position it better. Okay. Then I'm going to export just that body, so export selected, and let's go here, body, repose. And now, if we have a OBJ or a subtool that has no subdivision levels, then all we really have to do at this point is we go import, bring it in, and it will snap that back down. Just replace everything. So now that's the manual way, but you can imagine if you have multiple subtools, it can get quite tedious to select polymesh, import, and then go in and append. So I'll show you another way. But before we do that, I want you to notice one really important thing. So see how the boots, one is fine and one is not. So when that is the case, you really need to be aware of it as soon as possible, and then you need to hide one. So I'm pressing Control-Shift and dragging out a lasso, and then before I let go of the lasso, I release Shift, which is going to turn this red and hide what's inside. Now if I press Control-Shift and I tap, it'll bring that back. If I press Control-Shift, click and drag, it inverts it. But now what we want to do with the boot is go down from the tool palette. So let's close all this. We're in the tool palette. We go to Display Property and we choose Flip. Then Control-Shift, click, and we're looking at both. Now we can go in and divide it, and we have no problems. So keep in mind, if it's a subtool, it's totally different controls here. So divide, I can divide this 4 times. I can divide the boots 5 times, 6 times. The cape can be divided twice, and we can treat them all separately from there. So each subtool will have its own layers, its own geometry, its own texture information, its own morph target, all of that. Now if I want to work with polygroups, such as if I want to be able to isolate the arm so that I can get in and sculpt behind it on the torso, that's a pretty simple process for us to do. We can, with this lasso selected, press Control-Shift, click and drag, and then release Shift so that we get an area isolated. We got that. And now we can go in and go to Polygroups and say Group Visible, turn Frame on, press Control-Shift, and you can see how we've got 2 separate groups. Okay, but to get a cleaner view of this, a cleaner cut, we can go into Transpose, press Control, click and drag on our model, say isolate just that section. This model has a particular issue there with the back. And then we can go into the Masking tab, say Hide Points, we can say Group Visible, and then we've got 2 separate groups. And that's a little cleaner. Now if my topology was a little cleaner, we would have got this area as well. And now anytime that I work, whether or not I have frame on or not, I can just go in and say isolate 1. So I press Control-Shift, click on the part I want to stay visible. I can invert that by Control-Shift, click and drag, and then get the inside of the bicep and move on from there.